I'll add me to the stage. There you go. Mr. Producer's a little drinking a little apple juice there. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the presentation. Thank you so much for being here. We're live now. Let's push this button right here. Now we're live everywhere. Yeah, it's tragedy. Hello, everybody. Happy Friday to you. Happy Friday to you guys. Hopefully you're having a good Friday wherever you are on this day. So hopefully, you're enjoying it. And again, hopefully, people on TikTok can be nice. Most people are. It's always it's always just a handful of individuals who, like to say something stupid and think they're saying something clever. Nonetheless, we always be blessed and be blocked. That's what we do here. So, all right. So, folks, I'll get to your questions in a little bit later on. Right now, we're going to have a. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Look, this conversation tonight is going to be a case that was very intense, and it was one that affected Zach extensively. Zach Bagans. So, get it? No, I get it. So it was. I'm talking about the Demon House. The Demon House in Gary, Indiana. I want to make this very clear for people so that people are not confused, because apparently people are. I don't run around graveyards chasing ghosts. That's not what I do. And when people say that, all they're trying to do is diminish my credibility and my ministry. And I'm not going to allow them to do this. Clergy have done this. Bishop Long, he chased ghosts. No, I don't. No, what I do is what Jesus informed his disciples to do, and go and cast out demons in his name. Thank you. I don't have to prove to you that demons exist. I'm here to help the families who know they do. So when I get involved with cases, it is because it is a very dangerous situation. The family is at a point where they can't take it anymore. And then I'm the one that answers the call. I'm the one that travels to these people's homes. So the clergy have a tendency sometimes of throwing shade, but yet they've never answered the calls and gone to people's homes very late at night, travel for hours, 8-10 hours, not charging a penny. So let me make this very clear. I don't chase ghosts. I am clergy who deal with very dangerous cases. I've done this now for 25 years. I've dedicated my life to it. So I think that needs to be understood before we proceed any further. All right, everybody, I'm Bishop Long, and I appreciate you guys being here. And that's great. Artemis is coming. Yep, that's great. Woohoo! Yay! So hopefully, everything's good and they'll splash down safely, and that's wonderful. That is wonderful. Good news. I still think it's odd, though. Let me tell you what I think it's odd in just a second. I'm Bishop Long, presiding bishop for the United States Old Catholic Church. I also serve as an exorcist. I performed 35 documented exorcisms on people who are truly possessed. I blessed thousands of homes in 25 years. Don't charge, never charge, don't receive a stipend or a salary from the church. So I pay for it out of my own pocket. That's what I do. It's what I've been doing it for a long, long time until, thankfully, recently. I put $15,000 on my credit card to help people for free. So for those of you who keep saying I run around chasing ghosts, why don't you run around and go chase your tail? Because what I do is I deal with some pretty serious stuff. And tonight we're going to talk about a case that, unfortunately, it's had some pretty bad effects on people. If you want to first go to the Unexplained Network, I have a Master of English. So you can go to the Unexplained Network. That's where we're running on the show as well. And if you want to go to my website because you're bored, have nothing better to do, and you want to find something to put you to sleep, well, there you go. Go to bishopjameslong.com. bishopjameslong.com. And then, of course, the church's site is usocc.org. Now, if you go to my website, there are some books. If you go to bishopjameslong.com, click on the books link, buy every single one of them. Every single one of those books. And before the trolls start running their mouths, 100% of the profits we're donating to the MKS Kids Foundation. It's an orphanage that we're partnering with. They're my books. I have every right to make as much money as I possibly want from my books. But our community has chosen to take all the funds and give that to the MKS Kids Foundation. So when you go to the books, know that you're helping them. And I think that's a beautiful thing. There's also a fundraiser link there on my website. You can help them directly if you wish. They are a phenomenal organization. They're doing great things. And the church's site is usocc.org. All right, usocc.org. I want to remind everybody that tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do have, Tim, why don't you join us? I don't remember ever seeing you here, Tim, because I was just getting ready to say at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have night prayer. By the way, 6 days a week we're here where we do read from the Bible, where we do teach from the Bible, where on Sundays and Wednesdays we have Bible studies for 2 hours. And Tim, I've never seen you here. Been doing that for 6 years. So Sundays and Wednesdays are our Bible study, and at 8 o'clock, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So please join us. We'd love to have you guys. And then, of course, night prayer. We have night prayer again. We have tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I appreciate Jax. I want to make this very, very clear. One day a week for 1 hour and 30 minutes, I talk the paranormal. That's it. 1 day a week for 1 hour and 30 minutes, 90 minutes. We talk paranormal. That's all. The rest of the time, it's theology. And even when we're talking the paranormal, it's still technically theology. So for those of you who are confused, let me to enlighten you. And but we love the paranormal. There's nothing wrong with paranormal. Paranormal is great. I love the paranormal. Absolutely have no problems with the paranormal whatsoever. Okay. If you want to know more about the church, go to usocc.org. I'm not answering questions that are specifically on the website because that just tells me people don't want to go to the website. If you go to usocc.org, all the information is there. Everything is there for you. Everything. And there we are. All right. Good. It splashed down. Well, that's good news. That's good news, everybody. So Artemis has splashed down safely. There we go. Well, that's good news. Well, that's wonderful. See, I wanted to make sure make sure everybody was okay, and looks like Artemis landed safe. I think it's pretty cool. It's still odd, though. It's still odd if you think about this. So I went to space camp as a kid. I still think it's strange that we act like we've never been to the moon before. I mean, but it's true. If you really, they act like they have not been to the moon. So I don't get it. I'm kind of confused about that. I mean, it's a little strange. Mr. Producer, what? It looks like Mr. Mr. Producer is kind of. So it's a little odd to me. It's a little odd. I think it's great. So the theory is, let me tell you why. That's the theory. So the technology that we had when we landed on the moon was very elementary. I mean, it was in its very infant stage. And after the moon landings in 1972, then NASA decided that they wanted to kind of switch and start funding the space shuttle program. And the reason being is because the International Space Station. Because you can't, with rockets, you have to have the space shuttle because it's so much cargo you have to take up. So all the funding went from, the Apollo mission that was scrubbed, and all the funding went to the space shuttle program for the International Space Station, because you couldn't. I mean, obviously, the International Space Station was a huge, massive project, and the space shuttle are just enormous, and so they were able to place so much items and whatever they needed to build the International Space Station. So that really is, the money went there rather than continuing on the Apollo program. So that's the theory. But I still find it weird that we act like we've never even been to the moon. So I did hear about the Pentagon and the Vatican. I understand. But I just, what are you going to do? There's always sometimes you just shake your head and say, why? Come on, it's the Vatican. So, I mean, the Vatican's not going to say, yay, war, woohoo. I mean, you shouldn't. I don't think the Vatican is not supposed to do it. The Vatican's not supposed to be a cheerleader for war. I mean, you can say that, Iranian government is bad and all that other stuff, fine, but you can't say, okay, war, this is great. And what else are they going to say? War is bad. I mean, I think that's a universal truth for all of us. I think anybody with any moral sense would say war is bad. Shouldn't have it. Should avoid it. Unfortunately, there are some bad apples, and you have to defend yourself. I'm not implying anything with that statement. I'm just simply saying sometimes war is inevitable. In this case, you can argue differently. I'm not arguing whether it was or was not. I'm simply saying the Vatican is going to say war is bad. I mean, they're not going to give a cheerleader for war. So not what you're going to have for the Vatican. Okay. Oh, I agree. We shouldn't hate. No, we should not hate. Hate is a strong word. So, all right. But tonight, everybody, we're going to get into our presentation because we have a lot to go over. Nope. We're talking about this. We're not talking about that. And we're not going to do this. We're not playing this game tonight. We're not going to cherry pick scripture so that you can actually discredit scripture. You can go someplace else with that. Crawl back from under the rock where you came from. We are not going to cherry pick scripture so that you can discredit it. Nope, not going to happen. Not on this platform by Felicia. But tonight, what we are going to do is we are going to have a conversation right now about one of the most, I think, violent and almost, I would say, probably one of the most well-documented cases that I've ever studied. And that is the Demon House. The Demon House in Gary, Indiana. Now, immediately, I know some people don't want to admit the fact that demons exist. I know a lot of people will say, oh, that's just middle-aged nonsense. You're wrong. I want to make this very clear so that people are not confused. I've already said I don't get paid as clergy. I don't charge. So for those of you who say, oh, you're just doing this for fame and fortune, you do things for fame and fortune to make money. It's kind of hard to make money when you're the one paying for it. So I don't charge. I've never charged anybody to perform an exorcism. I've never charged anyone to bless their home. But I will tell you that I've seen and I've witnessed 35 exorcisms. I'm not here to sell you a book. I'm not here to, and the books that I do have are going for the MKS Kids Foundation. So there's no ulterior motive for me being here other than me telling you what I've seen. And you can take it or leave it. But I have no ulterior motive other than to share my experience and what I've witnessed. So if you were to ask me, do I have any doubt in my mind? Does possession exist? Do I have any doubt? Absolutely no doubt. No, zero. 1,000,000% no doubt. I've seen things that I can't not explain. I've witnessed it. I've seen a form of levitation, can't explain it. I've seen the eyes go completely solid black, going white, the muscle, the facial muscle contortion, the contortions in the facial expressions, the body language, the guttural sounds that are very unnatural that no human being can make. No human being. I've had one case where the person was screaming and it sounded like it was an 8D. So it sounded like it was back behind me and everywhere. Like that's for the purpose to disorient you. So I've seen the possession, and I've worked cases that almost brought me to my knees. And so I'm not going to pretend that it doesn't exist, because it does. And this is one case that I do believe is legitimate. So I'll get to your questions, but I don't get to your questions until after my presentation, because I have about 80 pages worth of notes. So I put a lot of work into this presentation, and that's what we're going to do right now. I want to take you into a case that's not buried in ancient history, not distorted by centuries of retelling, not dependent on folklore or even legend to give it weight. This is a case that unfolded in the modern era in a working class neighborhood involving a family that, by all outward appearances, had no reason to fabricate the kind of events that they're going to soon report. What makes this case so deeply unsettling is not simply the claims themselves, but the fact that multiple professionals, individuals trained to observe, document, remain skeptical, became directly involved and left with more questions than answers. The case that I'm speaking of is widely known as the Demon House haunting. It took place in Gary, Indiana. It's a modest home that before this family moved in had no widespread reputation for being haunted or even dangerous. It was not a location that appeared on paranormal maps. It was a house. It wasn't just a regular house. It was quite simply just another residence in a quiet neighborhood. And yet, within weeks of the Ammons family moving in, something began to manifest. Something that would escalate from subtle disturbances to events that even seasoned investigators struggled to rationalize. Latoya Ammons, she moved into the home in 2011 with her 3 children and her mom. Like many families, they were focused on starting fresh, settling into a new space and establishing a sense of normalcy. There was no indication, at least initially, that anything was wrong. No immediate sign of danger, no overwhelming sense of dread upon entering the home. It was just a regular home. And that is often how these cases begin. Not with something dramatic, something quiet, almost dismissible, something that lingers at the edge of perception. So the first disturbances, they were small enough that they could be rationalized. So the family began noticing flies, large, persistent, black flies, gathering around a particular window. Now, in itself, that might not seem alarming. Flies appear in homes for a lot of reasons. But what made this unusual was the timing. This was not summer. This is not a season where insects would typically be active in large numbers. It was in the winter. And yet, day after day, the flies continued to appear. The families cleaned constantly, removed them repeatedly, sealed windows, checked for sources, and still they returned. So it became less of an inconvenience, more of a pattern, something that did not behave in a way that made sense. And now, not long after that, the atmosphere of the home began to shift in a way that it's difficult to quantify, but commonly reported in severe haunted cases. And what I mean by that is the family described a growing sense of heaviness, as though the environment itself became oppressive. And this was not fear that was triggered by a single event. It was a gradual awareness. Something wasn't right. Something that could not be seen, but could certainly be felt. Thank you. So it's the kind of sensation that lingers in silence, the kind that causes people to second guess their surroundings, to pause before turning off a light, to hesitate before walking into a room. Then came the sounds. So at night, when the house should have been still, footsteps began to echo from upstairs. Not random creaks, structural noise, but what the family described as a deliberate movement. The sound of someone walking back and forth, pacing, stopping, then continuing again. This happened repeatedly, night after night. Well, naturally, they investigated it. They checked every room, every corner, every possible entry point. There was never anyone there. No sign of forced entry, no evidence of an intruder. And yet the footsteps continued with a consistency that made it impossible to dismiss. So at this stage, many people would begin to question themselves. Fatigue, stress, environmental factors. There are always explanations we reach for before considering something beyond the ordinary. But what began to push this case beyond that threshold were the moments of direct encounter. So Latoya's mother reported waking one night with the distinct sensation that someone was in the room with her. Not a vague impression, but a very clear awareness of presence. And when she opened her eyes, she saw a figure standing at the foot of her bed. It was not fully defined, not something she described as, pierced detail, but it was there long enough for her to recognize that it didn't belong there. She reacted immediately, calling out and alerting the rest of the household. But by the time everybody arrived, the figure was gone. See, experiences like this are often dismissed like as dreams or sleep paralysis. But what followed made it far more difficult to categorize as sleep paralysis. So the focus of the disturbances began to shift toward the children. And that is where the case takes a much darker turn. So in many documented hauntings, especially those that escalate into what is described as oppression and then leading into possession, children are often sometimes used. Now, whether it's due to psychological vulnerability, spiritual openness, I think it's quite honestly using them as a pawn to attack the real victim. But in this case, the behavioral changes, they were significantly deepened. They were concerning. And the oldest son began exhibiting sudden extreme mood changes. He would move from normal behavior to intense anger without clear cause. There were moments where he appeared like disconnected, as though his awareness had shifted, as though he was present, but not entirely in control. So he began speaking about hearing voices, not imaginary companions, voices that conveyed disturbing, very inappropriate content, things far beyond what would be expected of a child of this age. Now, for those of you who are wanting to know, so the children were ages 7, 9, and 12. The 12-year-old, she levitated. The 7 and 9-year-old were described as behaving aggressively. And we'll talk a little bit more about what happened. So the middle child, in contrast, became increasingly fearful. He would point to a specific area of the house, like corners or doorways, empty spaces, and insist that someone was there. Not just present, but watching him. He described figures that others could not see. He reacted with genuine terror. I'll get to your questions after the presentation is over. Everybody just relax. Just enjoy the presentation. But not the kind of fear that fades with a reassurance. So at this point, the family was no longer dealing with isolated incidents. There was a pattern forming, a progression that suggests an escalation. And then came one of the most widely discussed moments in the entire case. The events would later be referenced in reports and interviews as a turning point. One evening, while family members were present, one of the children reportedly began to levitate. And now, according to those in the room, the child rose off the bed in a slow, controlled manner, not thrashing, not convulsing, but lifting, as if guided by an unseen force. The reaction was immediate: panic, confusion, disbelief. But this was not something that could be easily explained or dismissed. And just as suddenly as it began, it ended with the child falling back down. So, it's now claims. Now listen, this is important. So now claims like this demand scrutiny. And they've been met with skepticism from many who have reviewed this case. That's to be expected. But what makes this incident particularly significant is not just the claim itself, but the context in which it occurred. And within a broader pattern of escalating activity that would soon draw the attention of authorities. So as days progressed, the situation within the home became increasingly unstable. The family reported a constant sense of being watched, of not being alone. Even when physically isolated, sleep became difficult. Tension within the household grew. What began as subtle disturbances had now evolved into something that affected every aspect of their daily life. So eventually, the severity of this situation reached a point where outside help was sought. This is where the case transitions from a private family experience into something that would be documented, investigated, and debated on a much, much larger scale. Law enforcement, social workers, medical professionals would all become involved. And in their accounts, recorded, filed, documented, and in some cases, publicly available, that elevate the case beyond just a ghost story. Because once those individuals stepped into that house, they did not leave with easy answers. Some left with reports that described behavior they could not fully explain. Some left questioning what they had witnessed. Some would later state quite plainly that something was happening in that home that did not align with their understanding of reality. And that's where we're going next. Because in the next part of this case, we're going to examine what happened when authorities became directly involved, including one of the most controversial and widely discussed moments of the entire investigation, an incident inside a hospital that is well documented by multiple witnesses, doctors, nurses, that would push this case firmly into the national spotlight. So again, skepticism is good. There's nothing wrong with skepticism. But when you hear what happened, there's something going on. Something absolutely was happening here. So by the time outside authorities became involved, the Ammons home was no longer just a place where strange things occasionally happened. It had become an environment that seemed to resist normal expectation at every level. So what had started as isolated disturbances had now developed into a pattern of behavior. It was consistent, intrusive, and aggressive. And when the family finally reached out for help, they were not simply asking someone to investigate noises or shadows. They were asking someone to make sense of something that was beginning to feel very intentional. The first individuals who entered the situation from an official standpoint, they were caseworkers and law enforcement. These were not people arriving with expectation of the supernatural. They are trained professionals to assess risk, identify abuse, neglect, psychological distress, environmental causes. Their role was not to validate paranormal activity, but to find grounded explanations, ensure the safety of the kids. Almost immediately, something about the environment inside that house began to unsettle even them. As a matter of fact, one of the responding police officers would later describe the atmosphere as unusually heavy, as though the air itself carried a heavy weight. Not a physical obstruction, but something psychological that felt like it was pressed down on the body. This is a description that appears again and again in demonic cases. The sense that the environment is not neutral, it's not passive, but that it's actively influencing perception, emotion, behavior. So during one visit, an officer reportedly observed a set of blinds in the home that began to move. Not gently, not in a way that could be attributed to airflow, but with a force that suggested something deliberately pushed it. The officer checked for open windows, drafts, anything that could account for the movement. Nothing. And yet the motion had been clear enough to register immediately as abnormal. Another detail that would later be included in the official documentation involved what appeared to be footprints. Listen to this. Now, footprints, we don't think, well, who cares? Footprints. Not on the floor. On the ceiling. Dust patterns suggested that the outline of small feet moving across the ceiling as though gravity itself had been ignored. These are police officers. These are caseworkers. These are not paranormal investigators. And when investigators attempted to explain this, they found no clear source. No physical mechanism that could easily account for such marks. Now on their own, these observations might still even be dismissed. Unusual? Sure, but not definitive. However, what was happening simultaneously with the family, particularly with the children, was becoming more difficult to contain, more difficult to explain. So concern about the children's safety led to involvement from Child Protective Services. And this brought the case out of the home and into the clinical environment, where behavior could be observed under controlled conditions. And it is here, inside a hospital setting, one of the most disturbing incidents in this entire case reportedly occurred. The children were taken to a hospital for evaluation. Medical staff, caseworkers, family members were present. The expectation that professionals would be able to assess what was happening to determine whether this was psychological, behavioral, or environmental in origin. At first, the environment was stable, controlled, predictable, exactly what you expect in a clinical setting. But that stability did not last. One of the boys began to exhibit behavior that immediately drew attention. His demeanor shifted in a way that was described as abrupt, extreme. His facial expression changed unnaturally. His voice reportedly deepened, and then, according to multiple witnesses who were there, he began to behave in a manner that defied normal physical expectation. What happened next has been repeated many times, but it remains one of the most controversial elements of the entire case. In front of doctors, in front of nurses, in front of case workers, the boy walked up the wall, not climbed, not scrambled, but walked. Now, these doctors, the nurses, are all on record of saying that they saw this. These are not paranormal investigators. They're doctors, nurses, caseworkers. And according to those present, he moved from floor onto the wall, maintaining eye contact as though the surface had become horizontal beneath him. He reached the ceiling, turned, and then moved down. This is a true event. This was not described as a blur of motion. It was not something that happened too quickly to observe. It was witnessed long enough, clearly enough, that multiple individuals reacted in real time. A nurse, a caseworker, doctors were present in the room, and they reportedly stunned in silence before they could even react. There was no immediate explanation, no mechanism, no indication of how such a movement could occur under these conditions. Now, to be fair, accounts like this naturally invite skepticism, and they should. But what gives this particular incident weight is not just the claim itself, but the fact that it was documented in official reports. It was written down, it was recorded, it was entered into case files by individuals whose professional responsibility it was to report what they observed, not to embellish it. And after that moment, the tone of the investigation began to shift, because what had been approached as a potential case of family distress or maybe behavior problems was now presenting elements that did not align with the standard models of explanation. The children's behavior continued to deteriorate. There were reports of growling, voices that did not match the normal speech patterns, expressions that seemed disconnected from their usual identity. At times, they appeared aware, and at other times, they seemed like withdrawn, as though something else had moved into focus. Now, LaToya, the mom, herself began to report experiences that were increasingly direct. She described being choked by an unseen force, being held down, unable to move, unable to call out. These were not isolated moments of sleep paralysis, but recurring events that left physical impressions, marks that she couldn't account for. By the way, this happened while she was awake as well. So if it just happens when you're going to sleep or waking up, that's sleep paralysis. No, this happened when she was wide awake. So a place where, whatever was occurring appeared to intensify. And at this point is a critical detail. Because in many cases involving claims of oppression and possession, there's often a progression, an initial stage of subtle disturbances, followed by escalation, followed by targeted interaction. So what was being reported here followed, I think, the pattern with disturbing consistency. So as more professionals became involved, the case began to draw attention beyond the immediate circle of investigations. Reports circulated, documentation accumulated. With each new account, the question became harder to ignore. What exactly was happening in that house? So because by now, the explanations that would normally be applied, psychological stress or environmental factors, misinterpretation, or being tested against events that did not fit neatly into those categories. And yet, even with all of this, there was still hesitation, reluctance to label the situation as something beyond the ordinary, because to do so would mean to acknowledge that something had occurred that did not follow the rules that we rely on to understand the world. But that hesitation would not last, because the next phase of this case would bring the individuals who approach the situation from a different perspective, one that considered the possibility that what was happening was not just unusual, but spiritual in nature. And once that perspective was introduced, the case would take even a darker turn, because what they would begin to uncover, or believe they were uncovering, suggests that this was not just a haunting, something far more invasive, something that did not simply exist within the house, but sought influence over the people inside it. And that's where we're going to go next. Because in the next part, we're going to examine the involvement of clergy, the process of discernment, the terrifying possibility that what was affecting this family was not external, but internal. So for those of you just joining, I'm Bishop Long. We're talking about the demon house in Gary, Indiana. So I'm giving a presentation on that, and I answer questions after the presentation. So just sit back, relax, and enjoy the presentation. So by the time authorities formally entered the situation, the events inside the Ammons home had already crossed the threshold that most families would never experience, and certainly would never expect to have, to explain to outsiders. So what had begun as a series of unsettling but potentially dismissible occurrences had developed into something far more intrusive, something that affected behavior and perception. So when LaToya Ammons reached out for help, she was not simply reporting noises or disturbances. She was describing a situation that, from her perspective, had become dangerous, unpredictable. And the individuals who responded were not paranormal investigators. Thank you. Nor were they predisposed to interpret events through a supernatural lens. Nope, they were professionals trained to evaluate real-world conditions. Law enforcement officers, caseworkers, medical personnel. Primary responsibility was to ensure the safety and well-being of the children. Now, their approach, at least initially, was grounded in standard procedure. They were looking for signs of neglect, abuse, environmental hazards, psychological instability. They were not expecting to encounter anything beyond those categories. But what they encountered inside the home did not present itself in a way that aligned comfortably with those expectations. Several individuals who entered the residence later described a distinct and immediate sense of discomfort that went beyond the ordinary unease feeling. It was not simply that the home felt tense or emotionally charged. It was much more than that. There was a consistent description of the environment itself feeling oppressive, as though the atmosphere carried like a weight that could not be physically identified. And this kind of description is often difficult to articulate, even more difficult to quantify, but it appeared repeatedly in statements from those who had no prior reason to interpret the situation as anything unusual. And during one of the earliest visits, a police officer, now when he saw those blinds, as I mentioned earlier, he checked that on multiple times. And he said there was absolutely no reason whatsoever, none, that those blinds moved in the way that it did. None. But it did. And when it started attacking the children, that's when the professional says, okay, we have a problem here. Again, there's a moment when this case stops being something a family is dealing with privately and starts becoming something that other people have to confront. Because up to this point, you can still explain things away if maybe. And with the house, you can say stress, or you can say the family has imagination, or you can say the house is old, noise happens, kids get scared. But when other people step into it, people who don't live there, people who don't believe what you believe, that's when things get uncomfortable. Because now it's not just their story. Now it's documented, it's witnessed, it's much harder to dismiss. And eventually the situation gets serious enough that the authorities actually went to the home and not so much investigated, but they were certainly most there to check out what's going on. I think the blinds is something that's really interesting because that really affected the police officer. Now, by the way, and the footmarks on the ceiling, the professionals are just making sure that are the kids safe? The children were taken out of the home. They were taken to a hospital, a controlled environment. I want you to remember, there were multiple witnesses, medical staff, caseworkers, people trained to observe behavior. They witnessed this boy walking up the side of the wall. You can say whatever you want to. You can say, well, that's just ridiculous. Again, they have no reason to lie. So I think this is the moment here that changes everything. Because now you have something that it didn't happen in the house. It didn't happen in darkness. It didn't happen in isolation. It happened in front of professionals. And now the case moves from something strange is happening to we don't know how to explain this. And that's a very dangerous place to be when you're in professionals. Because once you eliminate the obvious explanation, well, you're left with the possibilities that people do not want to consider. So after this, the children's behavior, it becomes more unpredictable. They started growling and not yelling, growling. There's a difference. There are moments when their expressions change and that people describe as not normal. And again, the phrase kept coming up, not normal. But that's the best word that people have if something doesn't fit. So LaToya, the mom herself, begins reporting physical experiences. She was grabbed, held, restrained. She described feeling hands on her, pressure on her body, like something was trying to overpower her. And I think here's what makes the details even worse. She said sometimes it happened when she was fully awake. She wasn't dreaming. She wasn't half asleep. She was fully aware. And that, at this point, this isn't being treated like a ghost story. This is where people start using different words. Oppression, attachment, demons, possession. And those are not words used casually, because those words come with weight, serious weight. Now, whether someone believes in that or not, that's a separate conversation. But in this case, those words started entering the discussion. Even doctors and the nurses and the caseworker were actually having to say this could be something supernatural because they've never seen someone walking up the wall before. Nothing else was working. So this isn't just a haunted house story anymore. And this is where we're going to go next. Because once the clergy then becomes involved, and once spiritual intervention begins, this case doesn't calm down. It gets worse. It gets more personal, more invasive, and even far more disturbing than what it is already. So I appreciate everybody being here. Now look, this is where the case takes a turn that for a lot of people is the hardest part to sit with. Because up to now, everything we've talked about could still be kept at a distance. So you can listen to footsteps. You can hear about objects moving. You can even process something maybe like the hospital incident. I don't know how. It's still external. It's still something happening around people. What comes next is different, because now what was happening wasn't just in the house anymore. It was interacting directly with them. And that changes everything. So at this point, you have a family, they are exhausted. They are terrified. They are running out of options. You have professionals who cannot explain what they witnessed. You have a situation that is not calming down. It is escalating. So the conversation shifts. Not comfortably, not easily, but it shifts. And someone says it out loud. What if this is spiritual? Now, whether someone believes that or not, again, in this case, it became part of the investigation. Clergy was contacted. And I want to be very clear here, because this matters. People who deal with this, such as myself, experienced clergy, we'd never jump to conclusions, ever. And I'm not saying that to be mean, but if you tell me that, a TV flew across the room, I'm not going to call you a liar. I'm not going to say, well, that's just stupid. I'm just going to say, well, okay, it didn't happen unless I see it. Because I've been told by so many people, so many things. And when I go into a case, I try to debunk the activity. That's my goal. How can I debunk it? And it's only at the very last resort do I consider demons. And by the way, for those of you who want to know, yes, I do work very closely with paranormal investigators. Thank God. Thank God. Oh, got to do a little puzzle. There we go. So yes, I do work with paranormal investigators. And let me tell you, the people that I work with are doing ministry. I wish people would stop picking on paranormal investigators. The people that I work with have been doing this for more than 10 years. They have purchased a lot of money, a lot of equipment. That equipment is not cheap. And not only is it not cheap, but you also have to learn how to use it. And the paranormal investigators that I work with, they go to these people's homes not charging a penny, not one penny. And sometimes it's 8-10 hours away from them. So they have to, everybody gets in the car. They sometimes even have to get a hotel. They investigate. That could take a whole day long. And then they have to review all the case. And then all the information is presented to me. That is ministry, friends. So please, let's lay off on the paranormal investigators, because if it weren't for paranormal investigators, I wouldn't be able to do this ministry. So let me explain something very quickly. 25 years ago, when I went public with my ministry, which I didn't want to go, I wanted to stay private. The reason is I went public is because I had friends in the paranormal saying, James, there's no clergy helping. So then I got involved, and that's how I got on all the television shows. It wasn't paid for them. I did them so that I could let people know, hey, the United States Old Catholic Church is here to help you for free. So for those of you who keep saying, oh, you're doing this for fame, you do it for fame so you can make money. Again, you can't make money if you don't charge. And you're certainly not making money if you put it on the credit card. So the reason is I went on all the television shows, the Ghost Adventures and everything else, is to let people know that I'm here to help. That was free advertisement so that my ministry could explode. And it did. I wasn't going to pay for the advertisement to do ministry for free. So when I got involved, I didn't want to go public, but I did. And so at that time, there was no network. So if I had a case in Florida, I had no idea how I was going to get there. I couldn't just hop on a plane and go. I haven't won the lottery. So I thought, okay, I need to create a network of paranormal investigators who are seasoned, who know what they're doing, who don't believe everything is a demon. And I need to create a network where there's a team in every state, sometimes in 3 or 4 in California and Texas. And then if I have a case, then I can contact that team and say, look, I need help here. Can you please go out and investigate this? And they would do this. They would gather all the evidence. They would present it to me. And then based on their findings, I would decide, okay, I'm going to have to do a fundraising and get to those people's house. So this is very important. I absolutely believe that the human spirits exist, and I absolutely am convinced. Oh, I know demons exist. So I'll get your questions. I promise you guys. Just hang tight. Let me do this presentation. So we're talking about. So now they get clergy involved in the demon house. And they don't walk in and say, well, this is possession. In fact, we usually do just the opposite. We look for psychological explanation, medical explanations, environmental causes. We try to rule out the supernatural because once you go there, there's no easy way back. So when Clergy began speaking with LaToya, they weren't just listening for what happened. They were watching her reactions, her tone, her behavior. That's important because in cases like this, patterns matter more than isolated claims. And what the clergy started noticing wasn't just fear, it was resistance. And that's a very specific word in this context. LaToya described moments where she felt like she was being physically held down, not metaphorically, physically. She said there were times she couldn't move, couldn't speak, could barely breathe, fully awake. And let me pause here for a second. Immediately, people are going to say sleep paralysis. That's fair. But the difference is, she said it didn't happen just in bed. It happened in different times. She was completely awake, sitting in her chair. And sometimes it left marks. So Clergy begins with something simple. Prayers, not dramatic, not theatrical, just prayer. And that's when we start watching for a reaction. Because in most cases, nothing happens. People feel comfort, relief, maybe emotion, nothing extreme. That's not what happened. During prayers, LaToya began reacting physically, not subtly, not emotionally, physically. She described pressure building in her chest. Her breathing became restricted, her body tensing like something inside her was pushing back. And here's the part that made everyone in the room uneasy. The reactions didn't feel random. They felt triggered, specifically by the prayer. And if whatever was happening did not like what was being said. Now, I want you to really picture this next part. This is where the fear becomes quiet. And that is the worst kind. During one session, the room itself changed, not visually, not dramatic, but the feeling shifted, heavy, thicker, like the air got tighter. And one of the clergy later described it as a moment where you become aware you're not alone, even though you cannot see anything. And then what? These are Roman Catholic priests that got involved in this. That's a very specific kind of fear because your eyes don't conform it. Your body does. And when your body reacts before your mind understands why, that's when it becomes hard to ignore. So LaToya later described one of these moments in a way that stuck with everyone involved. She said, and I quote, "It felt like something was right behind me, close enough to touch me. But when I turned around, there was nothing there. But I knew it hadn't moved." Now think about that. Not that something disappeared, that it didn't need to. And as the sessions continued, things did not calm down. They intensified. And there were moments when LaToya's voice would change, not dramatically, but enough that people noticed, strained, lower, different. And there were moments where she would react to things before they were said. Now, again, this is where people will look for explanation, and they should. But when you're in that room watching it happen, explanations don't come as quickly. And here's something that doesn't get talked about enough in this case. It wasn't constant. And that's what made it worse. So there were moments when everything seemed normal, completely normal. LaToya would be herself, calm, aware, present, and then, without warning, it would shift. And that unpredictability, that's what wears people down because you don't know when it's coming. You don't know what triggers it, and you don't know how far it will go. And this is the part people don't always talk about, the exhaustion. Not just physical, mental, emotional. Imagine living in a state where you're constantly waiting for something to happen, where even silence doesn't even feel safe. Silence isn't empty. It feels like something is waiting. So LaToya reached the point where she wasn't just afraid of what was happening. She was afraid of what might happen next. That's a different kind of fear. That's not reaction. That's anticipation. And this is the moment everything changes again. Because now the question isn't what's in the house. The question becomes, is it still just in the house? And that question is far more disturbing. Because if it is not tied to the house, then leaving the house won't fix it. And if leaving doesn't fix it, what does? And that's where we're going next, because the decision to leave was not the end. And what followed might be the most unsettling part of this entire case. So folks, for those of you just joining us, I'm Bishop Long. I serve as the presiding bishop for the United States Old Catholic Church. I also serve as an exorcist, studied for the Roman Catholic priesthood for 6 years. I've performed 35 documented exorcisms on people who are truly possessed. I do work with psychiatrists before I perform an exorcism. And of course, I've been in the paranormal field for 35 years, and as clergy for 25. Yeah, you should get a blessing, yeah. So at this point, the family reached something that you could only describe as a breaking point. Not one single moment where everything collapsed, but a slow realization that whatever was happening was not stopping. It wasn't fading. It wasn't resolving. Maybe most disturbing of all, it wasn't staying predictable. When something is predictable, even if it's frightening, you can prepare for it. You can brace yourself. Control your environment. But when something happens without pattern, without warning, that's when it starts to take something from you. It takes your sense of control. And once that's gone, everything feels different. So eventually, the decision was made. They were going to leave the house. And I want you to really think about what that means, because this wasn't just moving. This wasn't just, well, we don't like this place. This was a family saying, we cannot stay here. Now, most people would assume that's the end of it. You leave the environment. Problem stays behind. That's how we understand space. That's how we understand boundaries. But here's where the case starts to feel different. Because when they were preparing to leave, something did not feel like it was ending. It felt like something was watching them leave. LaToya later described this period in a way that's difficult to forget. She said it didn't feel like they were walking away from something. It felt like something was letting them go temporarily. And that's a very specific feeling, because that implies awareness, not just presence, awareness. So she described moments while packing where she would suddenly just stop, because that same feeling would cover her. That feeling that something was right there, close, not moving, just there. And here's the part that really unsettles people. She said sometimes it felt closer when she was leaving than it ever did when she was staying. And also, I think, here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. Right before they left, things went quiet. No footsteps, no disturbances, no voices, nothing. And that might sound like relief. It wasn't, because the silence didn't feel empty. It felt intentional. Like the activity hadn't stopped, it paused. So when something that's active suddenly goes silent, that's not always comfort. Sometimes that's worse, because now you don't know what it's doing. And once they were out of that house, there was an expectation, maybe even a hope, everything would stop. And whatever had been happening was tied to that place. And at first, it seemed like maybe that was true. The children began to stabilize. Their behavior improved. The extreme episodes became less frequent. And for a moment, it looked like the worst was over. But not completely. Because there were still moments, small at first, subtle, but familiar. So LaToya described being in a completely different environment and suddenly feeling it again. The same pressure, the same awareness, the same feeling that she was not alone. Imagine that. You leave the place where everything happened, you finally feel like you're safe, and then, without warning, you feel it all over again. Not as strong, not as aggressive, but unmistakable. And that's where the fear changes again. Because now it's not about house anymore, it's about you. And this is where things get even more unsettling. Because it didn't just happen when she was awake. It followed her into her sleep. And not in random ways. So the dreams had patterns, consistent themes. She described being watched, followed, cornered. And here's what made them different than normal dreams. They didn't feel like dreams. They felt like experiences. You know the difference. When you wake up from a normal dream, it fades. This didn't. It stayed with her. Clear, detailed, and heavy. And over time, the intensity decreased, but it didn't disappear. It changed. It became quieter, less obvious, but still present enough to notice. And I think here's why this matters. Because something loud is easy to identify. Something subtle can stay with you a lot longer. And there were moments where nothing was happening externally, but internally, she could feel it. That awareness, that presence. She couldn't explain it, but she couldn't ignore it either. This, my friends, is what is defined as demonic oppression, demonic obsession. So that attachment still remained, and she was under that stage of oppression, where it still begins to interact with you physically, intellectually. It's breaking down the intellect and will. Now, eventually, the house was demolished, gone, removed completely. For the most part, that would feel like a closure. Erase the location, erase the problem. But here's the problem with that idea. If the house was the source, then everything should have ended when they left, but it didn't. Not completely. And that leaves you with a question that's far more unsettling than anything that we've talked about so far. What if the house was not the source? What if it was just a starting point? Because if something can exist in a place, then it can continue outside of it. Then the rules we rely on don't apply the way we think they do. That changes how you look at everything. Because now it's not about location, it's about connection. What if, because the final part of this case isn't about what happened, but it's about what was never fully explained. And perhaps maybe that might be the most disturbing part of it all. So we're at the point of the story where most people expect answers. That's normal. In a normal case, someone steps in and says, hey, here's what really happened. Everything starts to make sense again. It's not what happens. In fact, this is where the case becomes even more uncomfortable, not less. Because instead of clarity, what you get is division. So people who were involved, people who saw things, documented things, experienced things, did not all walk away with the same conclusion. And that should make you pause. Because when trained professionals look at the same events and come away with different explanations, that means something in the middle doesn't fit. On one side, you have those who believe everything that happened can be explained. Stress, environmental factors, psychological influence. The idea that fear builds on itself, that once a person starts expecting something, they begin to interpret everything through those lenses. It's a valid argument. It's grounded, it's safe. Keeps everything within the boundaries of what we understand. But then you have the other side. The ones who were there, the ones who saw things they could not explain, the ones who wrote reports that included details they couldn't comfortably categorize. And they didn't all say this was something supernatural, but they also didn't say this was nothing. And said what you hear from them is something much more unsettling. They say there were things I cannot explain. That may not sound dramatic, but think about who's saying it. Caseworkers, police officers. Let's go back just for a second. The blinds moving, no airflow, witnessed, written down, police officer. The footprints in places they shouldn't be, that was observed. It was recorded. Police officer and a caseworker. The hospital incident, doctors, nurses, caseworkers, multiple witnesses saw this child walk up the side of that wall. Documented behavior that did not align with anything they'd ever seen before. And here's the key detail. Individually, each of those things you may think could be possibly explainable, but together, no, they form a pattern. Patterns are harder to dismiss because patterns suggest consistency. Consistency suggests something is actually happening. And here's something that I want you to really think about. Random events, they don't follow patterns. You know, they happen once, maybe twice. But when something repeats, when it evolves, when it builds, that's different. See, that means something is moving in a direction. And in this case, that direction was escalation. So there's a lot of haunting stories out there, a lot. But most of them stay in one category. You either have strange noises, visual sightings, psychological experiences. This case had all of it. And more importantly, it moved from environment to people. And that's the part that changes everything. Because once something moves from the outside to the inside, it's no longer just a haunting, it's something else. So even after everything, the investigations, the reports, the involvement, clergy, there was no final conclusion. No official statement stating this is what it was. That might sound frustrating, but actually it's the most honest outcome, because forcing an answer where there isn't one doesn't make it true, just makes it comfortable. And in this case, it's not comfortable. So here's what here's what stays with people. Not the dramatic moments, not the headlines, it's the smaller things. The consistency of the descriptions, different people, same feeling, that heaviness, sense of being watched, that awareness of something being present without being visible. That's not something you can easily dismiss. It's not imagination, it's experience. Now, I'm going to say something, and you can take this however you want, but it is the question that sits underneath the entire case. What if even a small part of this case is real? Not all of it, not every detail, but even just a small part. Because even if one of those moments cannot be explained, then that means something happened that doesn't fit within our current understanding. That opens a door, a small one, but a real one. Once that door is open, no, you don't have to walk through it. You don't even have to believe what's on the other side. But you can't pretend that it isn't there, because now the possibility exists. And once something becomes possible, it changes how you look at everything. So the case did not end with a resolution. It ended with distance. Again, the family left, the house was destroyed, time passed. The questions didn't go anywhere. They're still there. They don't just sit in this story, they follow you out of it. Because the real discomfort in this case isn't about what happened in that house. It's about what might be possible outside of it. That's where we're going to the final selection here. So we walked through everything. The house, the family, the witnesses, the reports, the moments that don't make sense. And this is usually the point where the story just wraps up, where someone gives you a clean explanation, or maybe at the very least a conclusion. I believe this case was possession. It leaves you with space, and that space is where discomfort lies. Most people, when they hear stories like this, expect one of two endings. Either it was all explainable, or it was something clearly supernatural. Either way, they want a line drawn, something definitive. Because once there's a line, you can step away from it. But this case never gave that line. And that's what makes it stay with people. Just think about what this family went through. Not just the events themselves, but what it did to them. When something disrupts your sense of reality, when it makes you question what's real, what isn't, that doesn't go away, even after things calm down, even after time passes. Because once you've experienced something that doesn't fit, your mind doesn't forget. It holds on to it quietly in the background. And I think here's also something important. The fear in this case isn't loud. It's not jump scares. It's not something chasing you down a hallway. It's quieter than that. It's a kind of fear that sits in your awareness. The kind that shows up when everything is still, when you're alone, when nothing else is distracting you. And that, I believe, is when your mind has space to remember. And this is where what people don't like to admit. The scariest part of this case is not what was seen, it's what was felt. Because seeing something, as frightening as it is, at least it gives you something to point to. Something to say, well, now there it is. But feeling something, that's different, because you can't prove it. You can't show it to anybody, but you know it's there. So remember how we started, that feeling, walking to a place, something just feels off. Imagine not being able to shake that feeling, not for a moment, not in your own home, not when you leave. That stayed with this family, not just the events, but the awareness. And on this, I'm going to wrap this particular this section up. This is where I'm going to leave you with on this one, not with an answer, but with a question. Because all this case really gives us, in the end, if something like this could happen in a normal house to a normal family without warning, starting with something small, something easy to dismiss, then how would anyone know when it's happening again? Not when it's obvious, not when it's undeniable, but at the beginning, when it still looks like nothing, when it still feels like something you can explain. Because by the time this family realized something was wrong, it had already been happening, already building, already moving. And that's the part that stays with you. Not the idea that something happened once, but the idea that it didn't announce itself when it started. It blended in until it couldn't anymore. So the real question isn't what happened in the house. The real question is, would anyone recognize it before it was too late? I want to share a brief, I talked to Zach. So if you have not seen the documentary, The Demon House, just a few things that I want to mention. 1 week before Zach showed up at the house, he was getting nightmares. He saw a goat man breathing black smoke into him. Now, LaToya, she saw this as well. Zach had the house inspected, and it had lots of mold and black mold. And that could cause paranormal activity. That could cause physiological issues. Squatters actually lived in the house. They claim nothing happened to them. The previous tenants before the Ammons showed up during Zach's filming at the house, the previous tenants claimed that her friend had heard footsteps above them. She also claimed that she never went to the basement because she was always afraid of it. She claimed that she had dreams in the house that someone she knew would be unalived, and her brother used to live in the basement, and he was unalived. Now, this was a family that lived there when Zach was at this place. A family showed up and said, yeah, we used to live here. So a CPS caseworker said that the case caused her such PTSD, she immediately left the area. She even spoke to a psychiatrist about what she saw. And within 30 days of visiting the home, the CPS worker had 3 broken ribs from a jet ski accident, a 3rd-degree burn from a motorcycle, broken hand when she hit a table, the same hand that became white when she touched this substance on the blinds, and a broken ankle from running. The home inspector, after he returned home from the house, he had a tree that nearly fell on his car while driving home. He was choked by unseen force while sleeping and developed cancer soon after. When Zach was filming The Demon House, the previous tenant showed up. They went into the house. She had a couple of her children with her. I think it was a young, looked like 13, 14-year-old kids. When she left the house, one of the young teenage girls tried to unalive herself. The young teenage girl threatened to unalive her mom. She immediately she tried to unalive herself. Zach had a professional come into the house, actually a very well-respected Dr. Taft. He does EMF readings and come into the house to do EMF readings. And the upstairs read normal, but the basement read very high EMF in just one location, but it was transient. It didn't stay in one location that it normally would. In the documentary, The Demon House, one of the Zach's cameramen, Adam, apparently went under the demonic influence and absolutely went berserk in the hotel. It frightened all of the guys because he was screaming that he wants this thing to show up and show itself and fight it. And apparently, when he was upstairs, he began feeling strange, and then he went downstairs by himself. That was when things started to occur. So when they were at the hotel, he was vomiting blood. He went berserk in the hotel. Now, I'll tell you what happened to him in a moment. Dr. Taft, who was an expert in EMF readings and more, was experiencing extreme anger, anxiety in the hotel. When Adam, the cameraman, was at the hotel, after he calmed down, there was an extremely high EMF spike on him and very cold temperatures around him. Adam began cursing at the entity, even demanding that they do something because he wasn't intimidated. What he doesn't know is that demons will use our weakness to cause amplification. And they were tapping into his anger and his fear. He lashed out and was inviting them to do more. That's what they wanted, the invitation. When Dr. Taft returned home, he was admitted to the hospital because his organs began shutting down. No explanation for it. He had been perfect health up until then. So because of his outburst, Adam, the cameraman, was let go. They tried getting him help, but he refused it. And Zach decided to And so, by the way, Adam, the cameraman, had long-term side effects. He actually tattooed 666 on his hand, the same hand that he felt a weird feeling to. And his energy just became very dark. So in the documentary, Zach decided to literally board himself up into the house. He heard a disembodied voice, which is an amazing catch. Disembodied voice means you can actually hear it. And it said, "That's my baby." When he was in the bedroom, he clearly heard a frightening voice and a black shadow walk right past the doorway that they caught on camera. If you have not seen it, I would encourage you to watch it. He says that excruciating pain began emanating from the back of his eyes, and he developed a very serious eye condition called diplopia. Was required to wear prism glasses for the rest of his life. Doctors said there's no explanation for it. And Dr. Barry Taft still has issues even today. So I think what's important here is to understand that these cases are very dangerous. And I encourage everyone, stay away from demonic cases. People want to experience it. Why? This is nothing. This is not something to joke around with, especially if you have families. If you have a family, if you have children, my goodness, that's something you don't want to ever do. And it's something that I would. I talked to Zach about this. I talked to Zach about this case. This was violent, and I believe strongly this was 100% legitimate. I mean, Zach was experiencing some very serious effects afterwards, which I'm not going to go into. But this was a place that. So what happened? Zach purchased the home for $35,000, sight unseen. He just purchased it. Now, some people say, "Well, that was stupid." No, actually, it wasn't. Actually, it was a smart business decision, because remember, he is the executive producer for Ghost Adventures. So he can make a documentary and sell it for a great deal of money. And he did. And the investment was $35,000. I mean, that's an easy win, because then you have 24/7 access to the location as long as you want. And so he purchased this home and eventually decided to just tear it down. You know, the problem is this is a demonic issue. And because this is a demonic issue, it doesn't just leave. And I'm very curious. I could never find the answer as to what caused it. Now, so when you have a demonic issue, there are several reasons. One of the primary reasons why a demonic oppression, demonic influence, whatever it might be, as far as infestation, attachment might occur, most of the time it's because someone did some type of invitation. Playing with Ouija boards, getting into some heavy stuff they shouldn't be doing, going to locations that are known to have demonic activity. Anything of this nature, most of the time there is some form of invitation. I have yet to discover, has there been. Now, it could have been a pre-existing haunting as well, or infestation. In other words, the previous homeowners could have done things that they should not have done, and you could, in fact, have had a infestation issue prior to them moving in, which does happen. I've had a couple cases of that. But it is interesting how it began to attack the family, and it was very aggressive. But it's called the yeah, that's right, Barbara. It's called the Demon House. So if you've not seen it, I would encourage you to watch it. I saw it on Amazon Prime. So, Father, I'm being contacted by people who are saying they're high up in the military. And so, Tina, my question for you is, why would people from high up in the military be contacting you? Okay. Yep. Yeah, Zach purchased it. I mean, not that I don't know your history, but you're saying that someone in the high up in the military contacting. Well, why would they? Well, I mean, then Tina, I probably would take that with a grain of salt. I mean, generals, colonels, they're not going to contact anybody just because, you know. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Did it? No. See, that's the thing. A lot of people say, will this open the door? Here's the deal. Now, if you're having issues at home, no, I wouldn't watch it. But honestly, most people that I know who are dealing with this type of demonic activity, they don't watch these because they're living it. They're already tormented. And so they don't want to live this. They don't want to be a part of this. So, okay. Let's just do this. All right. I'm going to do this for a second, if you don't mind. Okay. So if you have questions, we'll answer a few of them. And then I want to do a couple of these little things that I have for you guys that I put together. No. Guys, be careful about, getting news from YouTube University. I mean, it's called Demon House. I mean, sometimes, okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this for you guys. And that way, hopefully you'll enjoy this. If not, I'm sorry. Okay. I'm going to talk about demonic oppression that many people might miss this. So if you don't mind, I'm going to do this. And that way I can also make a video on this on TikTok too. So killing two birds with one stone. Yep. It's kind of the exact opposite. All right. What's the exact opposite? Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, Missy. Yeah, I wouldn't want that, Tracy, in your home. What is that question? Went too fast. Yeah, how does demonic oppression? Okay, so let me explain this, how it works. When you're talking about demonic activity, so let's say, for example, a paranormal investigator, they go out to a location that's known to have demonic activity. Is there anything here? Can you do something? Can you make a noise? Can you push me? That's invitation. Going to a location, say, come on, I dare you to do something. Demons are looking right at you, say, oh, we will. When you're by yourself in your home and you're scared, or your wife or your husband leaves you, or you lose your job, or when you're suffering from depression or anxiety, that's when they will attack back. They wait. And they wait. They're opportunists. So then you have what's called a demonic attachment. You go home. Because now you're home, now you have infestation. Religious objects are desecrated. Loud bangings. Sometimes banging of three is a mocking of the Trinity. Animals are terrified. Whereas before, all of a sudden, you wouldn't have this. And this house, by the way, in this house, the infestation, there were an oil substance that appeared on the blinds. So some form of ectoplasma kind of a thing. And then you have what's called demonic oppression and demonic obsession. So demonic oppression, oppression is when it begins to attack you physically. Biting, scratching, pinching, causing extreme sleep deprivation. It's terrifying. And then it goes into, all at the same time, what's called demonic obsession. Demonic obsession is when it begins to interact with you. Guys, I'm answering a question. I can't answer another question. So hang tight. So demonic obsession is when it begins to interact with you on an intellectual level. So you hear it. It mimics schizophrenia. It's trying to break down your will, your intellect and your will. So the oppression is when it's biting you, pinching you, scratching you, causing such extreme panic. That's oppression. It's breaking down the will. And then the intellect is when it begins to interact with you, speaking to you. You hear it. The intellect and will are eradicated or in a very vulnerable state. And then you have possession. So, and there is perfect possession, and there's the transient possession. And transient possession is when the demonic will enter the body and leave at will. But the person still remains in the stage of oppression and obsession because they do not want the intellect and will to obviously strengthen, because then they have to start the whole process over again. So, yeah, incubuses are very violent. I've had incubus and succubus cases, and they are very, very violent. Yeah. So I want to do this very quickly. No, rare, but you got to be careful with those people, because how do you know they're actually speaking to anyone? It could be speaking to demonic entities. When I was growing up, Bob, yeah, when I was growing up, I definitely lived in a haunted home. Yeah. Yeah, basically it's tearing you. You got to think about this. You got to think about this. Demonic oppression. Well, you're in your home by yourself. Nobody's there. And you're in your bed. And your bedroom door is shut, maybe for some of you who shut your doors. And you can still see light, coming from the top and the bottom. And you're by yourself. And then all of a sudden you see something walking past that door, breaking the light. Now you know you're not alone. It's things like these psychological games. It's things of this nature that could be quite terrifying. Not only that, but then you have, let's say you're in your bed and you're about to go to sleep and you hear someone call your name. And you clearly hear it. But it's a guttural. It's not like, hey, John, hey, Sally. It's a guttural sound. Evil. Predatorial. So when you hear that, again, these are trying to break down the person's will. And that's terrifying, especially when you know you're by yourself. But I want to do something very quickly, if you don't mind. Hang tight. I want to share the first sign of demonic oppression that most people miss. See, when people think about demonic attacks, they imagine violence, screams, chaos. But real oppression almost never starts that way. The first stage is usually psychological. So people begin experiencing an unusual heaviness, constant anxiety, deep despair, intrusive thoughts that seem darker than their normal personality. And the reason this matters is because fear and discouragement weakens spiritual resistance. So in many spiritual traditions, evil doesn't begin by attacking faith directly. It begins by attacking peace. And a person may start isolating themselves. They lose motivation. They feel spiritually distant from God, even though nothing in their life has changed. It's subtle. It's quiet. It's gradual. And because it doesn't look dramatic, people assume it's stress, fatigue, bad week. But experienced clergy often look for patterns. Is the darkness persistent? Does prayer suddenly become unusually difficult? Is there unexplained heaviness around the person or their environment? Oppression rarely announces itself loudly. It slowly pushes people into isolation, despair, and confusion. And by the time many people realize something is wrong, it's already been happening for a long time. And just don't do anything that's going to put yourself in a position where you have to worry about that. Okay. So let's go. I'm going to, but I'm going to be doing several videos a little bit later on. So, no, it's in Gary, Indiana. Yeah, it's in Gary, Indiana. What can we do? Never put yourself in a situation where you're going to give the invitation. Look, let me explain something. Possession is rare. Now, there are some people that believe that every John Doe is possessed. It's not true. It's not true. I have performed 35 exorcisms in 25 years. But I'm really strict about, okay, these things have to be checked off before I'll leave. I will not speak to the person at all until after everything has been presented. If we're dealing with if we're dealing with possession, I don't speak to them until after the psychological evaluation. I'm the last person that they speak to. The reason being is because, quite honestly, I have thousands and thousands of people requesting help, and I can't possibly contact every person. So that's why we have a process. Paranormal investigators go in, they investigate the claims. If it's a demonic infestation case, then they send me the evidence. Psychological evaluation is not required. If there's clear evidence that there's a demonic entity that's present, then I try to get to that home to perform the minor rite of exorcism. The minor rite of exorcism, by the way, you don't perform an exorcism on the home. That doesn't exist. You bless the home. You perform the exorcism on the demonic entity that has infested itself within the home. So that's a different situation, completely different than if you're dealing with someone who is possessed. Because when you're dealing with someone who's possessed, then you must have a psychological evaluation. I will not speak to the person at all until after the psychological. The reason being because I am not a psychiatrist. I don't want to feed in, even accidentally, I don't want to feed into the perhaps psychosis. And this is really dangerous where you have people who are not trained in demonology that are saying, well, you could be possessed. Well, that is so irresponsible to say to someone without having a psychological, because if that person is in psychosis, then you could feed into that. So if they have, for example, this dissociative identity disorder, and I perform an exorcism on them, I could create another identity. Or if they are in a paranoid schizophrenic, I mean, I could put them in a manic state. It's a bit dangerous stuff. So I have to have a psychological evaluation. If you're dealing with possession, that's required. Now, can a person who is has schizophrenia or something of that nature, can they be possessed? Sure, they can. Yeah. But at the same time, I need to I need to know what I'm dealing with. But look, if a paranormal team goes in there and says, look, this person levitated right in front of us, that's not a mental condition. Mental illness does not cause you to levitate. Mental illness does not cause you to have, knowledge on languages that you've never learned or were never taught. So certainly, yeah, a person who has a mental illness can be possessed. But I also want to speak to a psychiatrist to say and ask them, if I do this ritual, what are the consequences for that particular, what could happen from a psychological perspective? And that's where it gets a little concerning. So I performed 35 exorcisms. Yeah. Yep. Haunted dolls. So there's a lot of haunted dolls out there, alleged haunted dolls. I'm very skeptical of 99% of them. Now, I knew Lorraine Warren. I was friends with Lorraine. I'm absolutely convinced. I've seen Annabelle. I was in the presence of Annabelle. There's no question there's an attachment there. No doubt about it. You can feel it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. I have a doll, not that I wanted it. This doll was on the Eli Roth Presents Legion of Exorcists show that I'm on. And there's no question that something is attached to that doll. Well, I have proof of that. So first of all, for those of you who don't know, I might go do that presentation next week. I might bring in some items that I've never shown and some items that I have shown because we're also on the Unexplained Network now, and bringing in some of the items that I've collected through the years. People ask me all the time, why do you have these items? Because I'm an educator. I have a master's of education. I am a priest. I am an exorcist, and I teach people at paranormal conferences. Stay away from these items. Stop collecting them. There are really serious consequences with having these items in your home. I don't have them in mine. I have them in a storage facility. I don't want them here. So what's happening in the paranormal community is a lot of people are collecting these things, and not just the paranormal community, just the general public. They're collecting these items. And so I go to paranormal conferences. I bring some of these items with me from cases that I've worked so people can experience. And let me tell you something. I was at the Moundsville prison, Moundsville State Prison at the paranormal conference there. And I had several of my items. The doll that I'm going to have next week was there. And a paranormal investigator was actually there. And they did a thermal camera for heat signatures. And he did it because it's in the case, and he showed the case and he said, will you open it? Normally I never do, but I briefly opened it. And then he did the thermal camera. It was a 400 degrees. It's clear. I mean, I have the video. The heat signature was so extreme. It was so extreme. And there's a reason for that, and we'll talk about that maybe next week. Yeah. That's what it registered. That's what it registered on the image. I mean, when I opened it, I didn't feel the heat, but it registered that. So when I opened, it didn't like 400, it would burn. Obviously, it would burn the entire case that I had it in. But we're going to do that next week. We're going to do that next week. And I'm going to have the doll with me. I'll have several items that for next week's show. So next week, next Friday. Have I met the devil? I have, on the cases that I have worked, many times the demon that presented itself called itself the devil and other things. So FLIR camera, the FLIR camera. So, or Legion. So quite often. Okay. So yeah, we'll be here next week, of course, and we will also. I'll be sharing some of these things with you guys. Okay. So if you have questions, throw them out there, and if not, do I get scared? The first exorcism that I did, I was scared. I was the assistant, and that's when I saw the eyes go completely solid black, and that was a different world. I'm in Kentucky. You got to understand, like I said, because I just said that most of the time, 99. I'm trying to think. The incubus case wasn't done anything that she did, so that she didn't cause the incubus case. All the cases of possession, every single one of them, the individual did something, some form of invitation, whether they play with Ouija boards or do some things they shouldn't have done in their teenage years. There was something that caused that issue, something in all the exorcisms that I performed. So I've never had an attachment, no. So anyway, I have seen a form of levitation. Yep. So in other words, when I was so the person, she was laying down, and it was like someone had put a rope around her waist, and she just lifted up like this. And I even heard a vertebrae crack, and I thought, oh my God, she broke her back. I was really legitimately afraid of that. But it was just like someone just lifted her up just like this, just like a V shape. She was facing upward. Very unnatural. So, I mean, I was looking. I even looked to see if she was pushing on her feet. There was she wasn't pushing. She wasn't doing nothing. She just went like this. Okay. Yes, Tony. Yep. Yeah. All right. For those of you who are listening on this, I've answered that question like 4 times. Most of the time, it's because there is an invitation for possession. So, okay. So for those of you who are listening to this on podcast, we say goodnight to you guys. Gosh, it's gone by so fast. So we do have to close shop up because we're having night prayer. And so I have to close up everything. And hopefully you understand that. But let me just do this now. I'm going to do this. I'm going to upload this while I'm talking to you guys. And then, so we have night prayer coming up. And hopefully you'll join us. Okay, that's good enough. 1 second. Oh, come on. There we go. All right. So what I'm doing, if you go to bishopjameslong.com, you can click on the podcast link. And I'm uploading the podcast. That way, for those of you who like podcasts, you guys can enjoy that. For everybody else, remember, I tell you all the time, your value does not decrease based on someone's inability or refusal to see your worth. You're priceless. Don't let anybody tell you or convince you otherwise. Good night.